I took the night shift thinking it would be easy, just me, a quiet warehouse, and a wall of cameras. But then the monitors started showing things I knew weren't real. Each night, the footage got clearer, until I realized the cameras weren't just watching the warehouse, they were watching me. It happened on the industrial edge of the city, in a decommissioned logistics warehouse the company had leased for overflow. The place sat behind a chain-link fence, flanked by cracked asphalt and a drainage ditch that gurgled when it rained. It was early November, a cold Tuesday night, the kind where your breath hangs in front of you and the sodium lamps make everything look the same faded color. My name is Mike, I'm 30, and I had the building to myself from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., with 2 check-ins from the shift lead over the radio. The first night I took the post, I told myself I preferred quiet. I didn't understand the way that quiet can push back. Inside, the air smelled like damp cardboard and pallet wood. The lights hummed in long stitches across the ceiling, leaving dark seams between aisles. The control desk sat in a glass cube at the center of the building, with a wall of monitors showing feeds from 32 cameras. The sectors were lettered A through H, each with 4 angles. A laminated map on the desk had been updated with a marker months ago, arrows crossing out dead corners. Someone had written, in block capitals, "Don't waste time in G." The ink had bled, like it had been traced over. Carl, the shift lead, met me at the door at 9:45. He was a practical man with a tight cap and a ring of keys that clicked whenever he shifted his weight. He showed me the breaker panel, the emergency exits, the manual override for the rolling doors. When we reached the monitors, he tapped the glass with his knuckle. "You'll hear thumps," he said. "Thermal expansion. Raccoons on the roof sometimes. Pipes in the north wall are loud. Don't call it in unless you see a person. Motion on D and E can ping from dust. It's an old system." He signed the log, pressed the radio into my palm, and left me with the sound of the door sealing. It was 10:03 when the system cycled and the camera names blinked: A1, A2, A3, A4, B1, B2, and so on. I took my time. I walked the perimeter once, scanning the lines where light died into shadow. The warehouse was a grid of racked shelves that reached the metal ceiling, loaded with boxed returns and overstock, each pallet wrapped in plastic that whispered when the heat kicked. The north wall was scarred where something heavy had once been bolted down. In Sector D, an aisle stopped halfway, the end marked with a hinged chain. By 11:20 I was back at the desk, the heaters ticking behind me. The building settled in small noises, like knuckles cracking. I made notes in the log because that's what calmed me. Door checks at 10:40, clear. East fence intact. Roof access sealed. It felt good to make things clear. At 12:07 the first alert chimed. Not a siren, just a soft tone and a yellow border blinking around D3. I leaned forward. The camera stared down a long aisle where the racks narrowed into a door of darkness. Nothing moved. I tapped the zoom and the picture stepped closer, the way old cameras do, jumping rather than sliding. Halfway down the aisle, a shadow lay across the concrete that did not match any known shape. I held my breath and watched until the border stopped blinking. A minute later it chimed again. D3. Same aisle. The shadow had shifted left by a foot, like a coat thrown on the floor and nudged by a boot. I wrote the time. I told myself it was a pallet wrap dangling and catching the heater's breath. Still, I stood and keyed the radio. Control to lead, minor motion D3. Investigating. Static answered, then Carl's voice, bored and awake. Copy, Mike. Keep me posted. I took the flashlight and the ring of keys. The warehouse always feels different when you leave the desk, like stepping onto a stage where the backdrop is too big. My footsteps sounded wrong as soon as I entered Sector D, too slow and close, like the floor was listening. I kept the beam steady along the rack labels until they read D11, D12, D13. The plastic on the pallets stirred in a draft I could not feel, hissing like whispers fading away when I turned. The camera D3 is mounted at the far end. When I reached the point where the shadow should have been, there was only concrete stained with forklift lines and a thread of black dust. I stepped into the exact center and looked up at the blind eye of the camera. The glass dome reflected my face in the white circle of my light. I waited there, long enough for the cold to creep through the soles of my boots and the silence to change shape. A small crack popped somewhere above me. I kept waiting. Nothing. Back at the desk, I rewound the feed 10 minutes and watched my own walk down the aisle. The zoom made the picture grainy, but I could see the shadow before I arrived, a vague mass by the floor marker D12. Then the image stuttered. One frame I was turning the corner, the next I was already under the camera looking up, the shadow gone. The time code skipped 2 seconds. 2 seconds is nothing. 2 seconds is enough to curdle a thought you were sure of. I wrote it all down, like evidence in a file. 12:07 motion flag D3. 12:08 second flag. 12:14 on site, negative. 12:20 review reveals timecode skip. My handwriting looked calm. My chest did not feel calm. I called Carl again, told him the facts and left out the part where the building felt like a mouth that had just swallowed something. Dust and draft, he said. The server hiccups. This place does that. If you hear voices, that's the pipes. By 1:30 the humming settled into a single note. I walked the north wall to prove I could. I pressed my hand to the cinder block where the paint blistered from old moisture. The wall gave off a cold that felt like depth. When I got back to the desk, I caught my reflection in the glass and did not like the way my eyes looked too bright. At 1:47 the chime came again. D3. The border flashed. This time, there was no shadow on the floor. There was a figure at the end of the aisle, where the darkness begins. Not a clear figure, not a person you could describe to a sketch artist. A shape where there should be empty space, the edges soft, like heat blur. The head tilted, just slightly, the way a person does when they listen. I froze with my hands braced on the desk. The figure did not move away or closer. It only held that patient tilt. Then the feed flattened, a pulse rolled through the picture, and it was gone as if the aisle had swallowed it. I did not stand immediately. I rewound 4 seconds. The shape appeared, held, vanished. I let it play again, and again, trying to find the moment where a trick revealed itself. The time code did not skip this time. The frames were all there. When I finally rose, the chair scraped loud in the control room and made the skin on my arms prickle. I walked to D with my flashlight at my chest, aimed where my eyes wanted to look. The aisle looked exactly as an aisle should. Boxes. Labels. Dust catching the beam in a slow silver snow. I put my hand on the rack at D12 and felt the cold of metal. I stood where the figure had stood. I tilted my head to mirror it and listened. For a moment, the building made no sound at all, as if it were holding its breath with me. Then, from the far end, something tapped the concrete, a single, clean sound like a fingernail on glass. I swung the beam and found only the chain across the aborted aisle, gently trembling as if a truck had passed outside. There were no trucks outside. The drainage ditch whispered with the last rain of the week. My radio clicked twice like someone had pressed the button and let go. I walked back without turning my back on the dark, counting my steps, the numbers a rope I could hold. At the desk, I locked the door to the glass cube for the first time that night. I watched D3 until my eyes watered. I told myself what Carl had told me. I wrote the words down again, because writing can make a thing behave. Dust and draft, I wrote. Server hiccup. Old system. The line under the words trembled. At 2:05, the monitors refreshed. For a second, each feed went black, then returned. On D3, for one perfect frame that I cannot prove to anyone, I saw the aisle empty and the camera's dome reflected in a varnished circle of an eye that could not be there, looking back along the wire into the room where I sat. Then the normal picture blinked on, and I could hear the heaters ticking as if nothing at all had happened. The following night felt different before it even began. The sky was heavy with fog, and the orange streetlights outside the fence glowed like candles behind frosted glass. When I arrived, the air smelled metallic, like wet iron. The warehouse loomed darker than before. Inside, the hum of the lights sounded lower, more uneven, as if the current was fighting to stay alive. Carl was there for the handover, signing the same log sheet with his usual half-interest. "Quiet last night?" he asked. I hesitated before answering. "Mostly. Some motion on D3. Couldn't trace it." He didn't look up. "Told you, that sector's sensitive. Don't waste time chasing ghosts." He handed me the radio, patted the control desk once, and left. The door shut with a hollow thud that seemed to echo longer than it should have. From 10 to midnight, everything behaved. The heaters ticked. The motion sensors stayed green. I drank coffee that tasted of burnt paper and stared at the monitors until my eyes ached. But at 12:41, the sound came again, a soft tone, the yellow border flashing around D3. This time the shadow wasn't lying still. It moved. I leaned closer. The shape walked slowly between the racks, its outline stretched and thin, like it was being dragged through water. I froze. The time code ran normally, frame by frame. The figure passed one of the wall markings, D10, and stopped. Then, the head turned toward the camera. The movement was wrong. Too slow, too deliberate. It held that angle for nearly 10 seconds before fading into the darkness at the end of the aisle. I replayed it. The footage didn't skip. The figure was there, indisputable. But when I saved the clip to the backup drive, the playback file went black after 3 seconds. The rest was gone. No error message, just blank video. At 1:06 I called Carl. He sounded half asleep. "There's someone in the warehouse," I said. "I've got motion and clear footage." He sighed. "Mike, I've been doing this 15 years. You're tired. The cameras glitch. Don't make this your ghost story. Just finish your shift." I hung up, angry enough to stand. If there really was someone there, it was my responsibility to find them. I grabbed my flashlight and walked towards Sector D again. The deeper I went, the quieter the air felt. Even my breathing sounded too loud. I aimed the beam along the aisles, past the steel racks stacked with identical brown boxes. Every sound, my boots, the distant creak of metal, felt like it was bouncing off the dark and coming back a second later. Halfway down, I found footprints. They weren't deep, just dusty outlines, bare feet, small, like a child's. They led from the open floor into the narrow passage near the chain section. I crouched and touched the print. The dust was still loose, fresh. My radio hissed once and went silent. At the far end, the chain swayed gently, tapping against the metal post. Beyond it, darkness. No draft, no reason for it to move. I whispered into the radio anyway, control to lead, possible intruder in D sector. Static. Nothing else. I took one more step. The air grew colder, thick, and I noticed something strange, the smell of ozone, like a storm trapped in the walls. The flashlight flickered once, twice, and then steadied. When I raised it, a shape leaned out from behind a pallet 3 meters away. It wasn't a full figure. Just half of one, shoulder, arm, the outline of a head. But it was turned toward me, unmoving. I froze. The beam trembled in my hand. "Who's there?" My voice cracked against the silence. The shape didn't move. When I blinked, it was gone. I stood there, heart hammering, waiting for a sound, footsteps, breathing, anything. The only thing that came was the faint sound of a rolling door creaking somewhere above me, though I knew it was locked. I backed away slowly until I reached the main walkway, then turned and walked fast, almost running, back to the glass control room. I slammed the door and locked it. The heaters hissed softly behind me, the monitors humming. My reflection stared back from the dark glass. For a long time, I just sat there, forcing myself to breathe evenly, trying to convince my hands to stop shaking. At 2:08 I opened the live feed again. D3 was still. No figure, no movement. But on the lower corner of the screen, a new alert appeared, manual record, active. I hadn't pressed anything. The indicator light on the recording drive was blinking rapidly, like it was capturing something right now. I opened the playback buffer. The footage showed the same aisle I had just left, but now, in the middle of it, stood me. Not from before. Me, now, at the control desk. The same clothes, same posture, same flashlight hanging at my side. I watched, unable to breathe, as the version of me in the recording turned his head and looked directly into the camera. The feed cut to static. When it came back, the aisle was empty again. The heater clicked loudly behind me, snapping me back. I turned my chair toward the sound, but before I could stand, something flickered across the corner monitor, the D4 feed this time. A blur moving past the camera fast enough to trigger motion. I rewound, paused frame by frame. There it was again, faint, almost transparent, shaped like a person leaning forward mid-step. I stared until the image burned into my vision. Then I printed a still frame, thinking I'd show it to Carl in the morning. But the printer fed out a blank page, warm from the rollers, no ink at all. The clock showed 3:02. I shut the monitor wall down to a single view, D3. The aisle glowed pale and calm. No movement. The hum of the building became a steady pulse, almost hypnotic. My eyes blurred, and for a moment I thought I saw the reflection of my own face in the camera's dome again, just like the night before, except this time, the face wasn't mirroring me. It was smiling. I pulled the plug from the recorder, the screens flickering into darkness. The silence that followed felt too complete, too thick to belong to an empty building. That was the first night I truly believed something was watching from beyond the cameras. By the third night, sleep had started to feel like a rumor. Every sound from the warehouse stayed with me even after I went home. The creaks, the hum, the slow tick of the heaters, they echoed in my apartment walls like the building was following me. When I arrived that evening, the fog was thicker than before, hugging the fence so tightly it looked like smoke. Inside, the air was colder, though the thermostat read the same. Carl wasn't there this time. Just a note on the log, check motion sensors. D&E are misfiring again. His handwriting looked rushed, as if he hadn't wanted to stay long. I switched on the monitor wall, one by one. For a few minutes, everything seemed normal. But when I opened the archived footage from the previous shift, something was wrong. There were entire gaps in the timeline. 2 hours missing from the D sector, replaced by a black screen labeled error, missing footage. I played through what was left, frame by frame. At 1:47 a.m., the same time as the night before, the image stuttered, and for less than a second I saw something that froze me completely. The camera was pointed at the main aisle, empty, but in one frame a figure stood there, me. Same uniform, same flashlight. But my posture was different. I was facing the wall with my hands pressed against it, head down. Then the image cut out again. I checked the server logs. There was no record of me leaving the control room at that time. The security software even tracked my badge activity. Nothing. I rewound 3 times, zoomed in until the pixels blurred, and there was no mistake, it was me. The logical part of my mind started reaching for answers. Maybe old footage had been overwritten incorrectly. Maybe the system was mixing timestamps. But then I noticed something worse. On another camera, C2, the reflection of the control room's window showed my chair. Empty. At 12:15, a low vibration ran through the floor, like something heavy had dropped in a distant part of the warehouse. I checked the monitors, no motion detected, no alarm triggered. The hum of the heaters grew louder, steady, like a heartbeat under the concrete. I decided to walk the floor again, this time recording everything on my phone. The flashlight beam sliced through the fog of dust floating between the racks. The smell of ozone returned, faint but sharp, like burned wiring. I reached the D sector and stopped where I had seen the figure on the video, exactly between D12 and D13. I stood there, waiting for the sense of dread to pass, but it didn't. It only deepened. Something about the silence was wrong. The warehouse was never completely quiet, there was always a hum, a tick, a breath. But now it was absolute stillness, like the building had stopped breathing altogether. I looked up at the camera above me. The red indicator light was off. Dead. But the lens was pointed directly at me. I raised the flashlight toward it, and for a fraction of a second, I saw movement inside the dome. A small flicker, like something shifting behind the glass. The sound came next, a faint metallic scraping from behind the racks. I turned the light quickly. Nothing. Another scrape, closer this time, followed by a whisper of plastic tearing. I backed away slowly, keeping the beam steady, until my shoulder brushed a stack of boxes. The top one wobbled, then fell to the ground, bursting open with a dull thud. Inside were smaller boxes, sealed and unmarked. One of them had a faint handprint in dust, too small to be mine. I froze. My radio crackled alive. Carl's voice came through, distorted and faint. "Mike, are you in Sector D?" "Yes," I said. "There's something here. The cameras are glitching again." The line hissed. "Don't," his voice broke into static. Then silence. I turned to leave, but the aisle seemed longer than before, stretched. Every step echoed as if I were walking in an empty tunnel. When I reached the cross-section, I looked up at the monitor feed on my phone. It was still recording. But what I saw on the screen stopped me mid-step. I was standing in the center of the frame, flashlight raised, exactly as I was in that moment. But behind me, a second figure appeared, tall, out of focus, its head tilted slightly forward as if watching. My breath caught. I spun around, no one. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor. The screen flickered, and when I picked it up, the recording had stopped. The file was corrupted. I ran back to the control room, slamming the door behind me. My reflection in the glass trembled with each breath. I rewound the live feed for confirmation. On the D3 camera, I watched myself walking down the aisle again, but there were two shadows moving across the floor, one mine, one following. The second shape disappeared whenever I turned. By 2:30, the system froze completely. The monitors flickered, went black, then came back showing every sector at once. My own image appeared in the corner feed, me, sitting at the desk, staring at the monitors. Only I wasn't moving. Not even breathing. I leaned closer. The other me on the screen slowly turned his head toward the camera. His expression was blank, eyes fixed and glassy, mouth slightly open like he was whispering. I heard no sound, but I could almost feel the vibration in my skull. Then the speakers let out a sharp feedback tone that made me jump. Every monitor flashed white for half a second, and when the image returned, the other version of me was gone. I backed away from the desk, my knees weak. The reflection in the glass followed a second too late. For the rest of the night, I couldn't look away from the screens. The clock moved painfully slow. At dawn, when the first sunlight crept through the high windows, I shut down the system. The air felt normal again, quiet, dull, heavy. Before leaving, I checked the storage server one last time. All footage from that night had been automatically deleted at 3 a.m. by an unknown user. The system log said only one thing: user, Mike. The warehouse had begun to feel like a living thing, one that breathed when I did and fell silent only when I tried to listen. I came in early that night, before sunset, just to prove to myself that daylight could make it seem normal again. It didn't. Even with the pale light slipping through the high windows, the aisles looked endless, and every corner held a stillness that felt practiced, deliberate. Carl wasn't at the desk this time either. He'd stopped showing up after the first shift. The only sign of him was a short note left on a crumpled slip of paper: "System resets on its own. Don't interfere." The message ended without a signature, but the handwriting was shaky, almost childlike. I told myself I wasn't going to look at the cameras right away. I needed a different plan, something that didn't depend on the warehouse's system. That's when I remembered the old analog camera I kept from my first security job, a battered handheld model that recorded on mini tape. No network connection, no software, no possible interference. Just light and image. I set it up facing the D sector corridor, the same aisle where everything had started. I positioned it on a tripod from the maintenance room, angled low to catch the movement near the floor. When I pressed record, the soft click of the tape mechanism sounded oddly comforting, mechanical, simple, human. By 10 o'clock the building settled into its familiar hum. I checked the feed from the digital cameras, everything stable, no motion flags. Still, something about the air felt heavier. Even breathing took effort, as if the oxygen was thin. At midnight, a faint vibration ran through the glass walls of the control room. The lights flickered, dimmed, and came back weaker than before. The monitors flashed a brief message across the top, external device detected. The analog camera wasn't even connected to the system. My stomach tightened. I switched one of the screens to D3. The aisle looked the same, dark, quiet, nothing moving. But then I saw it, a thin, white shape standing near the end of the row, barely visible. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from my own monitor. Then it moved. Not with footsteps or sway, but with a slow, gliding shift, like the frame itself was bending around it. I ran to check the analog camera, certain it would prove the system wrong. The red record light was steady. I rewound the tape by a minute and pressed play. The playback started with my own footsteps fading as I left the camera's view. Then, right where the aisle turned into shadow, something else moved into frame. It was me. Same uniform, same walk. I came from the far end of the aisle, flashlight swinging gently at my side. The timestamp matched the current time almost exactly. But I hadn't been down there. I'd been watching from the control room. On the screen, my recorded self stopped in the middle of the aisle and turned slowly toward the lens. For a full 10 seconds, he stared straight into it. His expression was blank, drained of anything human. Then the tape cut to static. I hit stop and felt my hand trembling against the camera's casing. My throat was dry, but I couldn't swallow. Every instinct told me to leave, to walk out into the fog and never come back, but something stronger held me there. I needed to know what it wanted. I grabbed my flashlight and forced myself into Sector D again. The metal racks towered over me, stretching into the dark. The smell was different now, sharp and cold, like burnt plastic and rust. My boots made small sounds on the concrete that seemed to echo too long. Halfway down the aisle, the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. The light flickered in my hand, dimming with each step. I turned the corner near the chain section and froze. Someone was standing at the end of the row. At first, I thought it was a mirror trick. The posture was mine, the flashlight the same reflection of light on the badge. But then it tilted its head. Not in curiosity, not in recognition. The motion was mechanical, unnatural, like a camera adjusting focus. My radio came to life in a burst of static. Carl's voice, faint and warped, came through. "Mike, don't look at it." The voice cut out. The figure started walking toward me, slowly, soundlessly. I stepped back, beam shaking across the racks. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The air pressed against me, heavy as water. When the flashlight finally steadied, the aisle was empty. Only the chain at the end swayed gently, metal tapping against metal. I ran back to the control room. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the radio twice before slamming the door shut. The monitors had gone dark except one, the analog feed. The screen was still playing back, even though I had stopped the tape. On the screen, I was sitting in the control room exactly as I was now, but behind my chair stood another figure. Its head leaned close, almost resting on my shoulder, a blur of pale distortion where a face should be. My real shoulder felt suddenly cold, as if someone had brushed against it. I turned slowly. Nothing there. Only the hiss of the monitors. I yanked the tape from the camera and smashed it against the desk. The reel inside had blackened, the film warped like it had been exposed to heat. The warehouse went silent again, but it wasn't the peaceful kind of silence. It felt expectant, alive. On the largest monitor, one of the feeds blinked back on Sector D. The camera view was now aimed higher than before, as if someone had climbed the rack to adjust it. It was looking directly down at the aisle where I had stood moments ago. In the center of the frame was my flashlight, still on, lying on the ground. And then something stepped into view. Not fully visible, just a long shadow crossing over the light. The beam dimmed, flickered, and went out. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The screen stayed frozen for nearly a minute before the image slowly faded to black. When I finally looked up, the reflection in the glass wall showed the control room behind me, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement there too. A shape leaning forward, just enough for its outline to touch the edge of my reflection. I blinked, and it was gone. By the fifth night, I was already thinking like the building. I could tell when the heaters would click before they did, when the pipes would groan, when the hum in the ceiling lights would rise half a tone before the power dipped. I told myself I was learning its rhythm. The truth was, I was being absorbed into it. I hadn't seen Carl since the last message through the radio. No one answered the company phone either. The note he'd left, the one that said "Don't interfere," was still on the desk, curling at the edges. It looked older now, as if weeks had passed instead of days. That night, the fog was thicker than ever. It crawled through the half-open loading bay and settled along the floor, slow as smoke. Every time I exhaled, the breath hung motionless in the air. I didn't even try to pretend it was just a normal shift anymore. I knew something waited for me to sit down, to start the monitors, to look. When the clock struck 10 o'clock, all 32 cameras came online without my touch. One by one, the screens flickered to life until the wall of glass shimmered with pale light. For the first time, every feed showed the same image, the main aisle of Sector D. I stepped closer, heart hammering. The perspective was impossible. Each camera showed the aisle from a different angle, but in perfect synchronization, like mirrors circling the same space. In the middle stood a figure. Me. He was motionless, standing beneath the hanging chain, flashlight off. His head was slightly lowered, and the edges of his body looked blurred, as if the camera couldn't quite decide if he was there or not. I reached for the keyboard to shut the feed down, but the cursor wouldn't move. The keys didn't respond. The system had locked me out. Then the speakers came on. A faint loop of breathing filled the control room, not from the footage, but from my own microphone. It was my breath, delayed by half a second. I muted the channel. The breathing kept going. The air grew colder. The walls began to creak, slow and deep, as if the metal bones of the warehouse were shifting. I could hear the faint rattle of chains from far inside. The monitors began cycling through the feeds on their own. A1 to H4, faster and faster. On each one, the figure was closer to the camera. First halfway down the aisle, then near the end, then stepping into the frame. In the final feed, the dome lens showed only one eye, mine, staring directly into it. The power cut out. For a few seconds, there was only darkness and the sound of the backup generators stuttering to life. When the emergency lights flickered on, the monitors glowed faintly again, showing static. In the reflection, I saw movement behind me, slow, deliberate. I turned. The door to the control room stood open. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. The hallway beyond was flooded with that same rolling fog, white and dense. It curled along the floor like fingers reaching in. I should have run then, out the loading bay, into the cold air of the city. But the sound drew me, soft footsteps from Sector D, steady and calm, moving in rhythm with my heartbeat. I followed. The aisles stretched before me, endless rows of metal and shadow. My flashlight beam looked weak against the darkness. Somewhere above, the lights flickered on and off, creating slow-motion flashes of the world, rack, pallet, floor, empty air, rack again. Each time the light returned, I was farther down the aisle without remembering taking a step. When I reached the center, the chain that marked the dead-end aisle was gone. In its place, the air shimmered faintly, as if heat was rising from the floor. And in that shimmer, I saw them, flickers of all the recordings the warehouse had ever taken. Men in uniforms like mine. Different faces, different years. Some were walking the aisles, others standing at their monitors, others frozen mid-step. All of them repeated the same cycle, watching, recording, being recorded. Their images overlapped, transparent layers of past shifts. One of them looked up. His face was mine. I stumbled back, but the floor shifted under my boots. The sound of the lights above roared like static. My radio burst to life again, Carl's voice crackling through, "Mike, get out of there." I turned toward the sound, desperate for direction, but the voice wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from the speakers in the ceiling. The message kept looping, slowing each time, "Mike, get out, until the words lost meaning and became a low, broken hum. The light behind me flared bright. I turned back to the aisle. My other self was standing there again, a few meters away, staring through me. His eyes reflected no light. His mouth began to move, but no sound came out. Then, all at once, the building went silent again. He stepped forward. Every monitor in the control room turned on at once, projecting their pale glow down the hall. The beams of light met at the end of the aisle, surrounding the figure. The closer he came, the more the light bent around him, distorting the air. When he was an arm's length away, I could finally hear what he was whispering. "Watch the cameras." The world flickered white. I woke to the sound of sirens. The morning light was spilling through the high windows. The control room door was wide open. 2 police officers were standing over me, their radios hissing. I was on the floor, still holding the flashlight, though the batteries were dead. They asked how long I'd been there. I didn't know. They showed me the security footage recovered from the night before. The cameras had recorded until 3:14 a.m., then stopped abruptly. The final frame showed me walking down the D sector aisle and standing beneath the camera, looking up. I never came back into frame. The police searched the warehouse twice. No sign of Carl, no footprints other than mine. They sealed the place off, said the building was too unstable, the wiring too dangerous. I didn't argue. I never went back. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the company's automated system. It contained a single attachment, security footage dated the night after the police investigation. The file name read, "New guard detected, Mike." I opened it. The video showed the control room. The monitors were on, humming quietly. A man sat in the chair, watching the feeds. He wore my uniform, my badge, my face. And then he turned toward the camera, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Watch the cameras." The screen froze, then looped. That was the last recording ever taken from that warehouse.